I want to thank everybody for being here. And I want to start by talking just a little bit about the uniqueness of rural practice. We're all here because we're interested in closing the justice gap in rural America. But one of the challenges is getting attorneys, right, to move to rural places. And so one of the things that in Montana we'll do is we'll talk about some of the opportunities. So one of our opportunities is that if you're from a big city, you have traffic. So we don't have traffic. Like we call it the half rush hour, and our half rush hour means you were 3 cars back at the light. I mean, that's really it, right? And so that's a selling point. The other thing is in Montana, if you're the only attorney in the county, you are the county attorney. It's a law. So job promotion, right? Just figure out where there's nobody. But the challenge is, as we all know, are the distances in Montana, the snow. Often we have 56 counties and I think 14 judicial districts, maybe 16. I meant to look it up. But that means the judges are covering multiple counties. It means the courthouse is open maybe 1 day a week, maybe 2. Now, there's always a clerk there, but there's not a judge, and the judge's staff, they rotate, right? And sometimes it's all on Zoom. We started doing video courts years and years ago because of the distance challenges. And then there were the judges that didn't want to give up their travel claims, which was video went under. But COVID brought it back. But there are just a lot of unique things about living in a more rural area. Today, our panelists are representative of some of the more creative and different ways to address the lack of rural lawyers. We're going to talk about educating and diversifying law student and future rural practitioner populations. We're going to talk about how to attract professional talent where help is needed the most. Remember the rush half hour. And then making rural practice more successful and sustainable by providing mentoring and professional development. I'd like to introduce our panelists. On the end here, we have Ferronda Brassfield. Ferronda runs her own law office in Arkansas, and she is an alumni of the University of Arkansas Little Rock William H. Bowen School of Law Rural Practice Incubator Project. That's a big name.
It is.
She's finished law school in 2015 and went on to return to a rural community. She's walking the walk. That's the thing. So she's going to talk about that. I have to my immediate right, Sally Hullava. Is it Hullava?
Yes, exactly.
Hullava?
Yes.
I have a friend with a V. The state court administrator from the North Dakota Supreme Court, and she oversees North Dakota's rural attorney recruitment program. On the end is Tyre Perlman. She's a staff attorney with Legal Services of the Hudson Valley, practicing in a rural community, and she co-chaired the New York State Bar's Task Force on Rural Justice. And then we have Anthony Schultz, the Associate Dean for Faculty for the Rural Law Opportunities Program at the University of Nebraska. So thank you. We're gonna start with a question. We have about 45 minutes. We're a little behind, so if I think you're going on too long, I'm gonna take Lynn's role of killjoy and pull you forward so we can get to our questions. And I'm just gonna say this from the beginning. If you have a question when we get there, and Jessica will remind you, direct it to one person so we know who to answer. Nobody knew on the panel who you were actually asking the question of, so we all answered, which took a long time. So we're just going to try and move that part along as well to get to everybody. So my first question, if this is to Ferronda and Tyre, you are both early-ish in your careers as lawyers, and you've chosen to practice in a rural area. Let's start with Tyre. Could you start by describing what your version of rural looks like?
Yeah. So full disclosure, I am actually from New York City. I grew up in the largest city in America, and I never thought that I would find myself practicing law in a rural community. I really never thought I would even leave New York City. And life just led me to upstate New York, which is tremendously rural. And what I consider rural is basically a beautiful place with less people. That's my definition of it. there's just less people around you, but they're good people, and there's a lot of incredible good work to be done. And I would say that one of the greatest rewards for me in transitioning from New York City practice to rural practice is just how very quickly you become a pillar of the community that you serve. It's a tremendous honor to have that role. You kind of get lost in the big city bustle, and it takes years for you to develop the kind of comradeship that you get with bar members, courts, and partner organizations and local people when you practice in a rural community. And the community impact of your work is so significant, and I really appreciate that about the practice.
So, Veranda, what's your version of rural?
My version of rural is much more rural than that, I think. No, I'm just joking. I graduated high school, and so I'm technically from Stuttgart, Arkansas. It's the rice and duck capital of the world. It is a town of about 9,000 people. As far as our court system, we still have a literal circuit judge that travels the circuit. So she goes from one court to the other, back and forth. And so it's a very farm town community. We have one high school in the area, and all the surrounding towns pretty much come to Stuttgart for education. It is, it's very much fueled by factory industry and agriculture, and many of the industries there are fueled by agriculture. So it is rural also means in my area, not a lot of advanced education. Lots of people are working class and pretty much just working from one day to the next to try to make their ends meet and to provide necessities for their families.
In Montana, we have frontier counties, which is a real thing in the census designation, and most of our counties are considered frontier. So, Veranda, what's been the most notable hardship or benefit of your rural practice?
You know, there are a few, and that's most noted. One of them is just the lack of resources all the way around. Often, I find myself as the person that cares, the lawyer with the big heart, taking on the brunt of a lot of the lack of access issues. You know, people need somebody to take on their issue, and they may or may not be able to pay. And so that's one of the hardships there. Another hardship is it's very, I tried to live in the town that I practice, but the access to resources is just, it's almost unbearable. Access to good health care. I have my mother is older and she's disabled. And so, living in that town where she could not get, the actual physical aqua therapy that she needed, or, the access to fresh food and actually, if you want to eat out, not eating something fried. And I know that sounds, it's very basic, but it's a lack of access to amenities that made it impossible for me to live there. So I commute an hour, a little over an hour to my office so that I can practice in a rural area, and I can also have a quality of life that I wouldn't be able to enjoy just living in Stuttgart.
So when I first came to Montana, I practiced in eastern Montana and would drive the circuit, and went to Glendive and was very excited because the hotel had a tower of salad. What I didn't realize was that every salad was mayonnaise based, like every single one of them, because the truck hadn't come in with the lettuce, right? Just that it's a real thing.
It is.
Yeah. So what about you, Tayyar? What are the hardships or benefits?
Well, I already spoke a little bit about the benefit, and there's many others, but I would say that the challenge is that you're serving a community where there's a high percentage of indigent clients. When I was running the Rural Law Initiative, I did a rural practitioner survey, where I surveyed upstate New York lawyers that service rural communities and got anecdotal and qualitative data about what were they really struggling. And one of them really was the indigent clients, and that there's really a lot of need and that folks aren't really able to pay for the quality legal services. And so a lot of rural practitioners do a lot of pro bono work. And unfortunately, because they're considered private practices, they're not getting subsidized or compensated for the tremendous amount of pro bono work that they do. They don't qualify for public service loan forgiveness, which I deeply believe they should be. 100%. If you're a rural practitioner, you should be getting public service loan forgiveness. And also another struggle is because you're one of the only lawyers where you live in the region, you're dealing with a high volume of cases because the need is so strong. And as a task force member, I have copies of this report, by the way, if anybody wants to take a look at it. But the data in New York State, at least, is that 74.3% of the rural attorneys that I surveyed were nearing or about to retire. That basically means that the majority of rural practitioners in New York State are about to age out of practice, and no new attorneys are coming to take over their practices. And so this crisis is really huge. And I presume that it's very similar in other jurisdictions as well. And just like the high volume of cases and the fact that there's just limited attorneys, and you can't really refer it out to somebody. And yeah, that's just like a real challenge. And just like a ratio of part of our survey did a ratio of like attorney to resident. In urban areas in New York State, per one attorney, they can cover roughly 40 residents. But in the more rural counties of New York State, one attorney covers 200 plus residents. And that ratio is a complete disbalance, which indicates the serious crisis in these communities, that there's just not enough lawyers for the need. It's kind of almost like not intuitive, because you would think, oh, there's less people, so we don't need as many lawyers, but it's actually not true. There's less people, but there's also very few lawyers to meet the need.
I've got to add something, because you made me think it's more difficult in a rural area to find support staff as well. You're likely not going to find a trained paralegal unless you poach them from the attorney up the street, or maybe they retire and they, now their paralegal is looking for a job. But, you're looking at realistically having to find someone like a needle in a haystack and then train that person and hope that that they stay. But as attorneys, if you've trained someone that's never been in a law firm or practiced law, you're doing a lot of the work for them and letting them watch you work while you pay them. And so that is a challenge as well. And with the lack of resources in these small towns, you may never get paid, but you still have to pay. You've got to make sure the mortgage is paid. You've got to make sure that all of the bills are paid, your malpractice insurance, your LexisNexis, all of the costs, the phone system, whatever case management software that you're using, all of that still has to be paid, regardless if your clients can pay or not. And so that's a challenge as well.
Yeah. So Anthony, Nebraska's Rural Law Opportunities Program takes a creative approach to the rural lawyer shortage by cultivating prospective lawyers as undergraduate students. You make law school more accessible for students from rural Nebraska and create a pipeline of talent that will return to practice law in communities, possibly even their hometown. How do you recruit students to the program, and what supports do program participants receive as they matriculate and move on?
Sure. So I'm glad we started with the first question, which was geared at sort of what does rural look like in the place that you are, because I think that's an important part of what we're talking about. Upstate New York is different than Montana, which is different than Nebraska. And this goes to how we recruit and the sort of situation we find ourselves in. We, as a law school, partner with 3 undergraduate institutions in Nebraska, 2 state colleges, and 1 university that's part of the university system. So the University of Nebraska at Kearney is an undergraduate institution that has a number of students in a community of about 35,000 people. We also partner with Wayne State College, which is a state college that's located in a community of 5,000 people, and Chadron State College, which is another community of about 5,000 to 6,000 people. Chadron State College is farther from Lincoln, Nebraska than Fayetteville, Arkansas. And Wayne is a little bit closer to Vermilion than it is to Lincoln. So the geography of what we're dealing with is an important piece of the idea. But what we've been able to sort of divine from the existing population of lawyers in rural places is the folks that are most likely to go practice in those places are from those places. And so that gave rise to the Rural Law Opportunities Program. Now, the analogy that we've heard with the medical field today, I think in the prior panel, is relevant here as well, because in Nebraska, part of what we did to try to solve disparity in terms of medical services available in rural places was create the Rural Health Law Opportunities Program, which predates the Rural Law Opportunities Program by a couple of decades. And I actually find in the development of legal education and maybe access to justice, we are trailing the legal profession by about 20 years in a lot of different ways, whether it's professional identity development or intermediaries in terms of practice, but maybe also in programs like this. In any event, the idea is to identify students who are attending those schools, Wayne, Chadron, Kearney, who are from rural places, who are going to college in a rural place, who will be likely to relocate to a rural place after they graduate law school. But one thing this idea was hatched by Tom Mall, who's on the task force, as well as some other folks, the dean of the law school at the time. They hatched this idea, and then they turned to me and said, "Well, okay, go do it." Right. And so my job was to try to figure out, all right, what do we want to do with it? So the problems that I identified at the outset as things that might be difficult and ways that we could operate the program that would be helpful was to really give students in undergrad a good understanding of what practicing law was and what law school was and what practicing in a rural area would be like, so that if they did come to law school, they would know going into law school that that's where they're headed, right? So a failure for me is to have a student come to law school and not like law school, right? They should know about law school before they get there. So this pipeline program was really geared at developing students and their knowledge of a legal education throughout their undergraduate experience. So to that end, I partner with personnel at all of those undergraduate institutions to get them to the law school once a year. They usually come to visit oral arguments by either the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals or the Nebraska Supreme Court. They sit in a law school class. They get a tour of the building. They meet students who are from where they're from their undergraduate institutions, and they develop connections with the law school over the course of 4 years of their undergraduate training. Then when they're in law school, when they come to our law school, and we've had a few that have actually gone to other law schools, which I actually don't believe that's a failure. I'd love for them to come to the University of Nebraska, and that's one benefit for us getting into this program. But if they wind up going to Gonzaga or KU or somewhere else, they're still likely to come back and practice law in these rural places, or more likely than a lot of other folks. So we've had some students go to other law schools, but many have come to our law school. And so as they're now in law school, and I'm in the 6th year of this effort, which means I'm just at the front end of having a full cohort of students coming to our law school, I provide a sort of a leadership program throughout law school, which is akin to, I think, what law schools are doing on professional identity development. We do a lot of goal setting. We do a lot of reflection, and we do a lot of work to try to figure out their path through law school that's going to equip them with the skills that they need in order to go serve in rural places, which is a set of skills that are different, I think, than some of the other folks that are going through law school. So we work to develop that. And I'm partnering with the Bar Association to also help foster mentorship as they move out into practice. And so basically this program is sort of like looking at high school graduates and trying to get them all the way to like their second or third year of practice. So it's a heavy lift, and that's a long-winded answer to your question.
And I think you already answered the follow-up, so I'm going to move to Sally.
Okay.
We've talked about pre-law and law school programs, so let's shift to recruitment of established lawyers. North Dakota's Rural Attorney Recruitment Program was inspired by a similar one in South Dakota, right? So what are the core components of the model, and how has it changed over time?
So let me start by saying North Dakota and South Dakota are like siblings. We very cooperative, but we're also very competitive. So I do have to give them due and say they had a great idea first. So the Rural Attorney Recruitment Program is modeled after what happened in South Dakota. And let me just put you just in a little bit of perspective with North Dakota's need to recruit attorneys in general, I think, but especially to rural areas. So we have 3,070 attorneys licensed in North Dakota, which sounds like a lot for a population of 780,000. Just over half of those people actually live and work in North Dakota, though. Of those attorneys that do live and work in North Dakota, 87% of them work and live in just 7 of the counties. So that leaves, 40 plus counties with no attorney at all in them. And then when you start doing the mental math and you look at what attorneys do, you start taking out attorneys who are judges, attorneys who are law clerks, attorneys who are county attorneys, attorneys who are public defenders, attorneys that work for the government in some function. And you realize very quickly that there's very, very few attorneys who can do general civil and family practice. They're just not available. And people still want to meet with and talk to an attorney when it's a personal problem. So we modeled after South Dakota. South Dakota has a program where attorneys can sign up for a 5-year program. We also have a 5-year program. South Dakota will pay them. It's 90% of 1 year of law school tuition. We kind of got away from that. We thought it was just too variable. Our legislature only meets every 2 years, and it's kind of a pain to change things with them, as I think most of you know. So we settled on $45,000. It's paid out over 5 years. The attorney commits to staying in the county or community for 5 years. Reflecting our very rural area, to qualify for this program, we need an attorney first. Second, a community. The community has to be either a county of 16,000 people or less, or a city of 5,000 or less. Again, looking at our very rural nature, that only eliminates on the county level. There are 9 counties with 16,000 or more people. On the city level, there are only 14 cities with more than 5,000 people. So it's widely available. We've just run the first recruitment. We had 3 attorneys apply. We had 2 communities apply. We did match the communities and the attorney, except for one guy who's still hanging out there. So we're hoping to do better. We're right in the middle of a recruitment now, and I have to say we started recruiting for attorneys in September. We haven't gotten any. We started recruiting for communities October 1st, and so far haven't heard from anybody, but we're fingers crossed.
Yeah. So, what would success look like for you in North Dakota?
Success for me would automatically be beating South Dakota. Sorry. No, success for me is getting attorneys to sign up for the program. And actually, I think a bigger part, getting the communities excited and seeing what's in it for them. I think that's going to be a big piece for us, is getting the communities to realize, even if you're not going to be a county attorney or a city prosecutor, that there's something in it for them.
So I want to hear from both Anthony and Sally on the next question. What key relationships and resources did you need to get it started and help with long-term sustainability? Why don't you go ahead, Sally?
So our program, not surprisingly to me, started with a judge and a county attorney up in the oil boom counties. And I think because when the oil boom hit in North Dakota, well, keep cycling through, but the last time it hit, we suddenly realized there was nobody to fill vacancies in the public defender's office. There was no one to fill vacancies in the state's attorney's office. There was no one to do family law. So that was a key partnership to start with, getting those folks interested and excited. They also worked really, really closely with our bar association, who's actively involved in funding this program. And finally, they worked very closely with the legislators who are actually attorneys. Somebody who could really understand from a practicing perspective what the deficit, what the issues are created by.
What about for your program?
So obviously the cooperation of the undergraduate schools, they're really doing the heavy lifting. So I neglected to mention that the students come through undergrad debt-free. So they have full scholarships to their undergraduate institutions. And the whole goal, one of the major goals of the program is to get them through law school with as little debt as we can possibly get them. So it's in-state students with no undergraduate debt coming to law school at a law school that is very well funded at the state level. And our costs are quite low. So we can realistically get a student through undergraduate and through law school with less than $20,000 worth of debt. And that student will have, I think, a tremendous capacity to go to a rural place and practice law. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we had graduate institutions that, to some extent, put some money into their scholarships, but also repurposed sort of existing scholarships, maybe rebranded them as going toward this sort of an effort. The law school's contribution involves, a modest payment to me, a meager payment to me. I'd lose a lot of money on this program, but in any event, so it's my time. I'm an associate dean for faculty. I teach 4 classes at the law school. My appointment is 40% research, 40% teaching, 20% service. So finding resources at a law school to do this is not an easy lift. But I was willing to do it because I'm from Elwood, Nebraska, a town of 650 people, and I think this is important. So that was an important contribution. The Bar Association, an important contribution, leadership of Tom, and then Sam and Liz, and then I think a broader support within our community. The question starts with institutions, but I always come back to it's Tom and it's Sam and it's Liz and it's me and it's Chuck and it's Kate and it's Brian and it's Richard, and we're the ones who made it happen, right? So I think that's an important thing to kind of keep in mind. It's always people who just will take the reins and make it work. And I think we're on the road to doing that. So partnership, but more money would sure help.
So Feranda, you graduated from the University of Arkansas Little Rock Law School Rural Practice Incubator Project. I got it better this time. Which was designed to prepare you to practice law in a rural area. What support was offered through the incubator project that you wouldn't have received as a solo practitioner otherwise?
Sure. So I was the inaugural class of our incubator. And so it was just getting started. There was some very valuable support that was provided. We received a $2,000 stipend you're just getting started. $2,000 goes a pretty long way with setting up services and paying for some of those initial costs. We had a boot camp that just was a crash course on all of the things that you need to know if you're going to be a practicing attorney anywhere, especially in a rural practice. One of the things was a requirement that you have to have malpractice insurance. And I was like, what is malpractice insurance again? So that would not have been on my radar had I not participated in the incubator. We received Lexis for 1 year. We received a subscription to Clio for 1 year. There were the local bar associations donated a year of CLE. So I was able to sit in on classes and really just learn all of the things that I didn't know and that I didn't know that I didn't know. But prior to my participation in the actual incubator, my law school provided a number of pathways for me to just kind of figure out what rural practice was, what it was like, what the challenges were. One of those programs was I was able to participate in a Shepherd's Consortium on Poverty. And it's with my law school, the Euler Law School was a partner. And we went to Washington and Lee University for like a seminar at the beginning of the summer. And then we did a download at the end of the summer there in Virginia. I was placed in the Legal Aid of Arkansas in Helena, Arkansas. Lee Richardson is back there. Lee, you probably don't remember me, but I worked for you for a summer, like right after my first year of law school. So I was in one of the poorest areas of the country, just watching the managing attorney, who was Faye Reed at the time, watching her as she almost single-handedly, took on these cases at Legal Aid, and to see what the needs were, and to see the just stark poverty and how that affected so many of the legal needs that people had there. I also had the opportunity to participate in as a Findler Fellow. So for 2 years, I worked with Arkansas Access to Justice to work on some of these issues, to research and to help develop ways that the state and Arkansas Access to Justice, Legal Aid of Arkansas, the other groups that were partnering, how we could help self-represented litigants. And we were able to do a rule change that allowed unbundling of services in Arkansas. And so those were some of the, just prior to graduating law school, those were some of the supports that my law school provided so that I could be immersed in the issues of rural practice, and the issues that poverty, the ways that poverty affect the legal needs of the citizens of Arkansas.
So what improvements would you want to see in the program?
I would absolutely like to see the program like a track program, more than 1 year. I don't think that I absolutely believe that I could still benefit from some support from the law school. There was that 1 year of assistance, and then after that, you're pretty much on your own. I would also absolutely love to see some loan forgiveness. I still have loans, and one of the things that just being a do-gooder, and as I look around the room, I see so many do-gooders in the room. And when you really care about an issue, often you are the one that has to bear the brunt of the issue. And I think that with rural practitioners, that our law schools, our state legislatures could do much more to alleviate some of those issues. I think that poverty is subsidized by the government in so many other ways. But the legal issues are kind of left to the people that really care. And so I think that extending the program for more than 1 year, I would say probably 5 years, it takes at least that to get your feet under you and to really get your business where you need it to be. And I think that, having more of a connected mentorship that's there, somebody that I don't want to bug, you don't want to bother people, you calling them all the time. But if you don't know, having that person or a group of people that you can call on consistently as many times as you need to while you're trying to figure it out. Because in rural areas, one day I might be doing family law. The next day someone needs probate, and the next day someone's got a criminal law issue. And so it's very difficult to be focused on one area of law when there's only 9,000 people in the town and people need everything.
Yeah. So Tahir, what would you add to Faranda's list that would make it easier for people to practice?
Yeah, Faranda, you really covered a lot in your remarks, and they definitely corroborate the research that I've done with the rural bar in New York State. I think a big complaint that came out of my own research was that there's real professional isolationism. And that takes a psychological toll, and it also takes a toll on, practicing because you're doing it on your own. You know, Ferranda touched on it, the difficulties of recruiting paralegals and support staff. Like there's just a labor shortage, and you end up being the one doing it all. And that leads to just a lot of stress. And in our own Rural Justice Task Force in New York State, we recommended a number of interventions that can provide more support to the rural bar. New York State is very urban centric. Our bar is very urban centric, and it took a lot of advocacy on our part as members of our task force to convince the urban practitioners of the need and like the support that is required here, and that this is a responsibility for the entire state bar. It's not, you operate in an urban center where there's plenty of lawyers, plenty of people you can hire, amazing broadband, but you just are totally clueless and don't seem to care about the needs of the rural practitioners. And doing advocacy around that has been challenging, but also really rewarding, because once you educate people about it, they're like, oh, wow, this is like a big issue for everybody. And we do need to take responsibility. I did just want to state that, again, I can't stress, like in my rural practitioner surveys, the attorneys would write back, I had a wonderful law school intern, and it was great to work with them, but they can't come work with me after law school because they can't afford, like with the lower salary and their student loan debt. So there was a lot of comments like that, which to me indicated that part of this problem is that you get lower salaries in rural communities, and it's hard to balance that with the student loan debt you carry. I also will say that I think where law schools can do better, because most law schools are urban centric, I think the experience of the rural law schools that are really creating a pipeline and educating and exposing their student body to rural practice opportunities is incredible. And I think that law schools can do that more. I remember our career development center when I worked at Albany Law School had all these panels where they would invite practitioners to come and talk. And they never had any panel on rural practice. And I self-organized it and invited the rural practitioners I knew through my network running the Rural Law Initiative to come and talk. And it actually brought in a surprising crowd, surprising for the Career Development Center, not surprising for me, but it brought in roughly 45 students at Albany Law School that were all coming from rural communities in New York State, and were so excited to be on a panel where they can talk to rural practitioners and learn about the opportunities they had there. That kind of mentorship, I think, is so crucial. And there needs to be more of it. And also the graying bar. We had, our survey indicated that there's a lot of seasoned veteran attorneys in rural practice that are going to be retiring soon. Many of them work way past when they wanted to retire because they're the only person in town and too many people rely on them. Like some of the respondents wrote back, I'm the only lawyer in town and I'm 65 years old, but I can't retire yet because too many people rely on me. And these people are willing to pass down their practices. They built amazing practices, have great community goodwill. Why not connect them to new attorneys or to new lawyers that are trying to move to rural communities? Creating some sort of connection in a formal way, I think, would be really meaningful and help bridge that gap.
Yeah. So in one of the reasons I'm moderating this panel is that Montana Legal Services runs a rural incubator project for attorneys. You heard me talk about the tribal one. Our state bar is very under-resourced, and we didn't really have a modest means panel in the state. And so Montana Legal Services decided we would create one. And so we worked with the bar, with our Justice Foundation, and started an incubator project. We designed a boot camp that we gave to our bar. We designed all the training for it. Now our bar puts it on, so it looks like it's theirs, but they give us all the money from the CLE, which goes back into the program, right? We do mentoring and networking with our attorneys and rural practitioners, right? That you have to commit to serving a rural area. We learned early on, we don't require people to live in the rural area. It didn't work, but they have to serve it either by travel or by phone or by video or something. You got to provide services in a rural area. We provide malpractice insurance for the cases we refer. They have to have their own for the rest of it. But it's 2 years of, monthly meetings with attorneys, people you can call, and it creates their own network. So they have a network among themselves. They know who to refer to. They know who to call when they have questions. And it's been really nice. And it gives our staff more resources. Now they pay. They do have to do so many pro bono hours, but they also do, modest means. They have to do a certain percentage of their practice. They do get some loan forgiveness from us. That's where the money comes back into the program to go back out. If you agree to do this, we'll help you with loan repayment.
And Allison, I think Tyre made a fantastic comment about the mentorship and partnering with people that want to retire. Yep. Because that's one of the things that really has catapulted my business is that I guess it was fate. And the judge he had been the judge in the area for so long. I had never met him. But he sat special for my judge in juvenile court one day. And he said, "Hey, Miss Brassfield, you've got to come down to Stuttgart and see me. I've got an office for you." And he really did have an office for me. And so I rented it for a very low money for some time. And then I was able to purchase that building from him. I didn't have to buy desks. I didn't have to buy a copy machine. I didn't have to buy chairs. I just walked into a law practice. That doesn't happen for everyone. I also walked into I'm a landlord now. And so one of my tenants is the public defender. And so so I was able to walk into that. And so I really think that connecting with older attorneys and people that want to retire and that can help you transition into the business is a fantastic way to get a good start.
So here's your final question. Like in Jeopardy. Who or what has a role to play in recruitment and retention of lawyers to close the rural justice gap? What haven't we talked about? Tyre?
In closing the justice gap, I really do think that it requires multiple things happening at the same time. I don't think there's one hack that is going to work on this, but I think the important thing is to make sure that a new generation of lawyers is going to be in rural communities to support. And I think that there aren't enough pipelines set up. I think there are, like what Sally's doing, and what Anthony's doing is incredible. And I think we need more of that and make sure that like law schools take on the responsibility to educate their students of the rural practice opportunities because they're tremendous and they're incredibly rewarding. And I don't think most law schools prioritize that. There's no internal strategic discussion about how are we going to make sure that we're like shifting the legal training paradigm away from like big law, urban centric places to rural places, which are incredible opportunities that people don't know about. I also think debt relief for rural practitioners is absolutely fundamental. I cannot stress enough how so many people are deterred from rural practice because they just feel too overwhelmed by their law school debt. And I think that expanding rural broadband, because that is one of the unique practice challenges, the broadband issues are really serious. And I think that expanding rural broadband to make rural practice easier. And for example, instead of driving to court, you could do a virtual appearance, or making sure that your clients also have access to broadband so that they can appear virtually will make a huge difference. And also bringing in urban practitioners to do legal services in rural areas using the technologies that unfortunately don't exist in most places in America because the infrastructure is just not there.
Sally?
I'm going to give you a very practical answer. I think there are two areas that really should step up a little bit more. One is your state legislature. They have an absolute interest in keeping every part of the state economically viable. It's a good investment. Investing in people is a good investment. And getting them to go back to rural areas helps keep it vital. The other place I would say is your Department of Commerce, or your whatever your tourism department is running under. Because we know from North Dakota's experience that a lot of the folks that actually move to North Dakota are returning midlife, or they're coming back later to take care of parents or something. But doing some more active recruitment to get those folks to think about North Dakota always says, come to the good life, and maybe come back to the good life would be a good slogan for this one.
What about Anthony?
So, I mean, we all we're lawyers who've operated in a legal system, and we have a really hard time thinking of justice as involving anything other than lawyers and the law. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case in many rural places, right? So, what levers are there to pull that can increase, justice outcomes, whatever we mean by that don't necessarily involve lawyers and the law. That's sort of a big philosophical question and the opposite of practical advice. But, practically speaking, I do think that, we have to think about what we're trying to do here. I mean, if we're just trying to maintain existing capacity in a system that's never met the needs of certain populations, then I'm not sure that that's the thing that we should be doing, right? If we're trying to actually enhance access to legal tools for achieving justice for populations that have never had access to them, whether it's because of poverty or discrimination or whatever, then we've got a much heavier lift, I think, on our hands. And it's not necessarily going to be solved by having more lawyers. We're going to have to fundamentally change institutions. So I wonder about that. The other thing, so I've heard a lot about debt relief. I sort of hate leveraging debt into outcomes, right? So, hey, here's a nice carrot for you because we've put you in a very difficult position by requiring that you finance your education by borrowing money. And so I think that there's a larger policy question there about, do we want to finance higher education, whatever that looks like, whether it's community college or 4-year undergraduate degree followed by 3 years of graduate school education, which is that's not inevitable either, right? Do we want to fund that through debt? Does that give us a lever that we're going to pull to try to get people to rural places when they wouldn't otherwise want to go there? And what do we think the sustainability of that really is? So more, I think, public investment in education, because I work for a public law school and I have my priors too. So thank you.
Rhonda?
I think that it's going to take a commitment from all of the players in the legal community to make this more sustainable, to make legal practice more sustainable. During the pandemic, we went to virtual court, which is something that everybody said that we could not do. We cannot have virtual hearings. We can't have people appearing via video. And we did it. It worked. A lot of my clients didn't have to take off work for a whole day so that they could sit in the courtroom and wait on their case to be called. They could sit at their desk, or they could maybe take a break and go out to their car. They could they could do their whatever hearing before the court, and then they could go about their day. They didn't have to lose wages for a whole day. A lot of that is being scaled back as we are opening up, and we just have to we have to think outside the box and not be so committed to how we've always done things, and consider how we can make this more sustainable for the rural practitioners that are taking cases, and the clients that are in dire need of these legal services and the relief that they need from the courts.
Yes, this question's for Anthony. How many students have gone through your program?
All right. So from UNK, for example, that's the Kearney School. We've had 30 students who have been in the RLAP program over the course of the last 5 years. 21 of them are in the program now, right? So we have to always think about we brought in students 4 years ago into that program. 8 out of 9 came to law school. They met so we have certain entry marks in order to get there. So they have to hit a particular LSAT level and have a particular GPA in order to gain sort of like automatic entry into the law school. So 8 out of 9 came to law school. Most of them are in their first year of law school right now. Chadron State College has had 27 students that have been in the program. We got 5 out of 13 graduates who came to our law school. 3 other graduates went to other law schools. We had some students that chose not to go to law school, which I think is actually a healthy outcome for the program. And then we did have some that didn't achieve the marks that we needed them to achieve. And we do assist them in achieving those marks. So we give them an LSAT prep course. We have them run through one course that's free, and then we'll invest in another course if they haven't met the mark. And we try to provide as much guidance on the LSAT as we can. But we in some instances have students that just don't meet the entry criteria, and we can't change those, right? Or at least we haven't been able to so far. So we've got 4 students from Chadron who are currently in law school and who will be moving on here in the next couple of years. And then Wayne State College, we yielded 4 out of 14 graduates of 34 total students. 20 are in the program now. 2 are in law school at this point, and 2 have graduated. So we've only had 3 students graduate from law school in the 6th year of the program's existence. One of those is actually none of them are practicing in rural areas yet. And I say yet because I really do believe that the ability to go and do rural practice in many instances is going to really settle in that 5 to 7 year mark out of law school when you worked in a firm in maybe a more urban area, gained a lot of experience, and are at a place where take the family and go back home, right, and invest there. So they haven't gotten there yet. I have high hopes that they will, but that's where we are so far. Really small numbers, and a lot of time.
I don't have a question. I have a comment that I want to share with everyone. Recruitment and retention are very important issues. And in that light, I want to share with everyone that about 2 years ago, I was asked to do a program to introduce students to the law field at my alma mater, Fort Valley State University. And as I was preparing for that presentation, I reviewed the ABA membership profile data. And about 2 years ago, when I looked at that data, the data showed that only 4.7% of all attorneys are Black. And that really resonated with me. In addition to, getting students interested in law school and recruiting students, I was amazed that the data showed that the number of African American Black attorneys is declined over the last 10 years from about 5% to 4.7%. So in that light, when I saw that data, as I mentioned, it resonated with me. So for the past 2 years, I've continued to do workshops at historically Black colleges and universities in Georgia. I've called the program the Roadmap to Law School Project. And when I do that Roadmap to Law School Project, in addition to introducing students to the legal profession, I also talk with them about practicing law with legal services agencies and practicing law in rural areas. The workshop, it has 3 components. Again, we talk with students about, what is required for admissions to law school. We have students talk with we have law students to talk with the college students about what the law school environment is like. And then we also have career professionals to talk with the students about various career fields. But I just wanted to mention to, this group that in addition to focusing on recruitment and retention of attorneys, that we also need to look closely also at what are ways that we can use to attract more Black lawyers into the legal field and attract more Black lawyers to work with legal services programs in rural areas. And one additional point that I want to mention is Georgia Legal Services, Anthony, we started a pipeline project similar to what you mentioned. We partnered with North Carolina Central University School of Law, which is an HBCU, historically black college, university law school. And every year we bring aboard one intern who's a rising third year student. And when the student is in his or her third year, we offer that student an opportunity for employment with Georgia Legal Services program. The emphasis is that during that summer, those students, they get a chance to see what kind of work we do. And we also expose them to practicing in our rural areas. We take them down to some of our rural offices during that internship so that they can have firsthand experience in what we're doing in those rural areas. And then again, the internship leads directly to a job offer to the intern if he or she does a good job during the summer.
My question's for Anthony also. And let me see if I can put this succinctly. Do you ever wonder that if by encouraging small town kids to get a law degree, that you're just giving them another opportunity to leave the small town?
How you going to keep them down on the farm, right? Once they've seen the lights of the big city.
I've been thinking about that song all morning.
Yeah. So my brother went to law school. It's one of the only instances in which we think we've had siblings on both sides of the podium. My younger brother's 10 years younger than me, and I taught him in class, and he didn't go back home. I didn't go back home. We're both from a town of 650 people. He's got bright. He works for a grain trading company called Gavilon as in-house counsel. He's looking at a job maybe in Denmark, that sort of stuff. It's this profession can change the trajectory of one's life, and we've sold it that way for decades, and that's one of the big benefits of it, right? So I don't know to what extent we are sort of working against our own ambitions through the program. My goal is to make sure that students see the value in practicing in a rural place and hopefully develop that as a definition of success for them. I push throughout the entire program that lawyers are leaders, but lawyers are fundamentally helpers. And that if they want to serve in a community, that their hometown or a place something like it would be a great opportunity to live a fulfilling life. And at the end of the day, that I think is probably what's going to get them there, right? If they see that as a place where they can lead a fulfilling professional life and help other people. But if they're in it to, if they want to make partner and bill 3,000 hours and, bring home $3 million a year as part of their partnership cut at a place like Jones Day, they're not going to do it in Elwood, Nebraska. That's for sure.
Wait, and I also just wanted to add, not to underestimate the people growing up in urban areas moving to rural areas to practice there, which is it does happen. I'm a case study in that. And also in my rural practitioner survey, there were a lot of attorneys that wrote about, I practiced law in New York City for 5 years. And then when I started a family, me and we moved upstate. And I can say that it's been the most rewarding part of my legal career. Like, we had a lot of commentary like that. And that's also like a feeder population. You don't have to be from a small town to want to be in a small town.
And I'm from a small town, and I've lived in Los Angeles. I've lived in Hollywood. I've lived in New York City, and done some of the big town things. But with the pipelines in the pathways that were provided for me, I did go back home, and it was because there was a road home for me, and I did have the desire. So I think that some people, once they can see the big city lights and still go back to the farm.
And I just add, so I tend to think that the rural urban distinction gets overplayed, and its relevance sometimes gets overstated. And so, we all have these idea of what's rural. And that's why I liked how this panel started with what's rural look like to you, because I think it's different things in different places. But I always joke that the town I live in Lincoln is smaller than the town I grew up in Elwood, because the community I interact with on a daily basis is much smaller than the community I interacted with on a daily basis in a town of 650 people. So I think the idea of rural and small communities really hard to understand when we really get down to it. And I use that to try to talk to students about what they want to do with their professional careers. Like, what is their foundation? What's their goal? If they want to help people in a place achieve their goals, they can do that in a rural place and lead a really fulfilling career. I'm really trying to help them find meaning, and those that find meaning in rural places, I think, will wind up there.
Join me in thanking Feranda, Anthony, Allison, Sally, and Tyre.